Welcome to the Hope, Health, and Healing Podcast. I am Michelle Hannah Fields, and I'm your host for episode 38, where I'm joined by my friends Chuck Northington and Sherry Griffith. Chuck and Sherry start out by sharing their journey of faith. Both of them started out in church as a child. Chuck's journey looked a little different from Sherry's in that as a teenager, he kind of took an exit ramp from his faith journey and detoured. But when he and his wife got married and started having a family, Chuck decided that they needed to raise their family in church. They went and visited different churches, and then they came back to the church that Chuck grew up in, Evangel Church, and that's where I met him. Sherry's journey started as a child in church, and her story was just a little bit different. She absolutely loved church, and she knew from an early age that she was called into ministry. She didn't know what that ministry looked like, but one day her path crossed with Chuck G., her late husband, and he was in ministry as well. So when they got married, they went and did ministry together. They pastored churches, and their journey brought them back to the area that Sherry grew up in, and they pastored a church in Columbus, Georgia. Both Sherry and Chuck built a solid foundation of faith that they leaned upon during their time of grief. Chuck's wife, Wendy, battled cancer for many years. And during that journey, they had many different ways that they saw God move in their life. God surrounded them with people to come beside them and support them, just as Moses had in the battle when Aaron and Hur raised his arms. Sherry's journey of grief looked a little bit different. Her husband, Chuck G., had a heart attack and was taken from them unexpectedly. They had no warning that anything was even wrong. Chuck and Sherry share how God has sustained them through their journey of grief. And He brought them together to begin this chapter 2. So they share their story of how they have seen God's hand in their relationship and how beautiful it is that they each know what the other one is feeling as they manage their grief. I know that their story is going to encourage you no matter what part of your journey you are in, whether you're just starting out in your relationship with Christ, whether you have been a long-time follower of Him, whether you are serving in ministry, or whether you are a layperson, or whether you are walking through grief, whether it was through a long battle of illness of a loved one or an unexpected illness. And it could be that you're in chapter 2 of your life as well. So sit back, relax with your favorite cup of coffee or beverage of your choice, and let Chuck and Sherry's story encourage your heart today. I am joined by my friends Sherry Griffith and Chuck Northington. And so I always start with how I know you, but thank y'all for both being here today. So Chuck, I actually knew you from work at TSIS. We didn't work together. I just saw your name and knew who you were. And then I know your mom. And she said, "Do you know my son? He goes to Evangel." And she knew I was going to Evangel, and I was like, "I don't think so." And then she told me your name, and I said, "Oh, yes, I do know." And so just going to Evangel, just seeing you, and I served on the board with you, and that's really, where we had more interaction was serving on the board of directors. And then Sherry, I have only had the pleasure of knowing you for a short time, just in the last year, and just love you have the most kind spirit. And so I love that about you, and I have loved getting to know you. And so now I'm serving with you on a committee for planning the Unite conference and just enjoying that. So I look forward to knowing you better and better. So thank y'all for coming.
Thank you for having us.
So my first question always is, where or how did your journey of faith begin? So whoever wants to go first can go.
I'll go first. I'm always envious of those people who say, "Oh, it was January the 21st of 1983," and I don't have that kind of date.
I don't either. If that makes you feel better.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just as a kid, and then we. I remember going to church. There was Ladonia Baptist used to run a bus ministry, and used to come through the neighborhood, and they would pick us up, and we would get on the bus, and we would do some Sunday mornings. But it wasn't real consistent. But then I guess it was. I remember in elementary school, my mom and dad were having some marital problems, and then they reconciled. And one of the reasons that they reconciled and things started getting better was because we started going to church. And we started going to Evangel, and so that's where I started was as a kid, and I just remember that was like in 4th or 5th grade, and I was active in Royal Rangers was a big part of my coming to know Christ, as well as youth camps and those kind of things, and just grew up in those formative years in the church. Just being involved and learning and more and more about a relationship with God and what it looked like. My high school years, my mom and dad ended up getting a divorce, and then I was working and going to school and working 40 hours a week and going to school during the daytime. So I fell away during that time and in my college years, but I think so when my wife and I got married, the very first thing I told her was we're gonna find a church and get back in church, and just because I'd seen how important it was in my mom and dad's how when we were in church things were great, and then when they weren't in church, so it was always important, and so then that was how my wife and Wendy and I ended up back at Evangel, and so that's sort of my faith journey.
I love that. How about you, Sherry?
Well, and I don't know exact dates either, but I do know that I was what you call on cradle roll, where I was born into an Assemblies of God church and 3rd generation, and that's all I've known. And I remember loving church, anything about church. I couldn't go enough. I just was hungry. I was hungry for the Lord, but just hungry for that environment. I loved it. And I remember we didn't go on Sunday nights, and I begged my parents, let's start going on Sunday nights, and we did. We started going, Sunday nights, Wednesday nights, and the Missionette program was so vital for me. I loved it, and I just felt I grew a lot in the Missionette program. And there were 2 churches that were really a huge part of my spiritual growth. And I started out at a church in Phoenix City, an Assemblies of God church. It was Girard Assembly, which is not even there anymore. And we were there till I was about 12. And then we went to Trinity, what was called Trinity Temple then, in Columbus on 12th Avenue. And that's where a lot of things happened for me as far as spiritual growth, and some other neat marked moments that I'll probably get to share later that happened with me.
Yeah. That's good. So a little similar story, kind of growing up in church, but a little different too. I love that. And, I think it's critical for us to have our children in church and growing up in that environment and learning, even if, like the Bible says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll not depart from it. And I used to think, well, God, that scripture's not right, because I see people that are departing from it. And the revelation he gave me was they might depart from it, but it doesn't depart from them.
That's so true.
They carry it with them. And so that's why it's so important to have kids growing up in church, And what happens is when they're old, if they're not living that lifestyle, they don't depart from what they learned. And it's always going to be on repeat over and over, and they will come back and be, a part of the family of God, And so I love that both of you have that in your past, because that is a solid foundation that you can build upon.
And then just to build on that, that was one of my proudest moments. And I tell any new parent that, of course, being my age, I'm not around that many. I don't have that many friends that are having babies. But when I had that opportunity, that's one of the things I'm like, and because people will brag on my girls, like, oh, your girls are so sweet, nice, and what's the key? What's the secret? And I'm like, it's consistently having them in church, And one of my proudest things is when they went off to college, and they both went to Auburn, and they both, it was that opportunity where they could have said, I'm casting off mom and dad, and I'm going to pave my own way, But the first thing that they both did really was when they went over there is to go find a church. And not only did they find a church, but they served, and they were encouraging their roommates and their in the dorm mates. And I thought, wow, thank you, Lord. That, you gave me that wisdom, because I knew what it was, growing up as a kid, how important it was to me in those Royal Ranger moments and those summer camp moments and those kind of things. And so, yes, you're right. It's they may depart, but it doesn't depart from him. It's that anchor.
Right.
You can always go back to. They know where the anchor's at.
That's right.
Go grab hold of it.
That's right.
It continues on, because the same thing, testimony with my daughters, now I have grandchildren that are in church, and it goes on. So it's important.
And one thing you said, Chuck, was it's important to have your kids in church. It's also important for them to see you living that life at home, because that really is a testament to them when they see you living out the faith that they learn at church. They see that in action at home, and that also grounds your children in the faith, and that's the foundation they build upon. Absolutely. Is that
I agree.
What was some of those marked moments that you said you had as a child?
Well, one of them, I was probably 15, 16, and it's when I was at Trinity Temple, and I remember there was a moment when God dropped in my heart. Some people call it a call to ministry. I don't know what it was, but I knew He dropped in my heart that I would be involved somehow within a church for, I felt marked for that. And I wasn't in a posture of prayer. I wasn't seeking. I was literally just walking down the corridor, and it just literally, the best way I can describe it is it just dropped in my heart. And I really didn't say anything about it, but I kind of treasured it, didn't know what that would mean or look like. I was the most timid human ever. My goal was to be invisible, I was so bashful, so I had no idea what that would look like. So that was a neat moment, and then, later God began to unfold what that was, and I visited North Highland. It was called North Highland Assembly of God. It's North Highland Church there on Whittlesey, and because there was something going on that night, and someone invited me, and it was a friend of mine, and I walked in, and I saw this fiery red-headed guy on the platform, and I think I'd seen him before, but I'd never met him. But anyway, I found out later that this is where ministry was going to be. It was going to be with this man, and I learned later that he had told a mutual friend of ours. He said the moment she walked in and I saw her, I knew I was going to marry her. And she said what any friend would: "You're crazy."
Right.
There's no way. She's had a high school sweetheart, and everybody knows they'll get married one day. Just forget it. Forget it. And to save confusion, his name was also Chuck. I usually call him Chuck G. Chuck Griffith. keep there from being any confusion. But yeah, he didn't let that stop him. He pursued me, and he pursued hard, and we met like September of '84, and we were engaged by February of '85 and married in June of '85.
Wow.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So we moved quickly, and so that's where it began to unfold. It started all making sense to me. He was on the platform because he was interning. He was in Bible school at the time and was doing an internship. And so things, after we got married, we went, finished school, and from there it was a whirlwind in the most wonderful way possible.
Yeah.
Of just a life in ministry, and from Illinois to Atlanta, Indiana, and then God brought me back full circle to Columbus in 2013, and it all made sense as things unfolded. It made sense why the Lord would bring me back here, and we'll get into that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's funny that you saw him that day, and that he was like, "Oh, that's the one I'm supposed to marry." That doesn't always happen like that. But, God is always in the details of our lives, and He knows exactly. And He planted that seed of ministry in your heart because He knew. He knew what was ahead. And, you just have to be obedient to whatever He's calling you to, even when you don't know what it looks like. I love that. Chuck, how about you and Wendy? Was Wendy, did Wendy have a background in church as well?
No. Well, it's she had gotten saved and baptized in high school. And then she had gone off to college, and she was gone for 4 years, and so we both sort of had a grounding in the church, and then we sort of drifted away during those high school and college years, and then but after we got back together, after we started dating and after we got married. And I just told her, I said, we're going to find a church, and she was like, we didn't discuss this before, getting married.
Yeah.
And I said, just trust me, and I didn't want her to, I grew up at Evangel, so I didn't want to force Evangel on her. So I said, we'll go wherever you want to go, wherever you're comfortable. And so we actually went and started visiting some other churches. And then we came back to Evangel and visited there for her, just to let her see. And then we ended up, she's like, no, this is where I want to be. And so, and I tell people, or I give advice maybe to people that are trying to get a spouse, it wasn't that she was reluctant. She just didn't grow up in the same, she grew up going to church with a boyfriend in high school. Not maybe through her family so much, but through her boyfriend. And so we had different experiences. And so I had to sort of pull her along gently. And I always tell people, we started going off to just going to Sunday morning service. And I would tell her, I'm like, you're not going to feel like a part of, you're just not going to really, you need community. You need small groups. Then you're going to make connections. Then you're going to really feel a part of the church, And so she was like, okay. And I can remember the first Sunday we went in, and we went to the door. Of course, I knew where I was going, but I didn't want to be the boss. Right? I wanted her to lead. I wanted her to go out front. I remember Hal and Stewart and Watson McKinney were standing there greeting. That was before we had greeters. The pastors would greet on Sunday morning, and we went to Sunday school, and we got to go into Sunday school class, and then it was then I was like, we're going to go to Wednesday night service, and she was like, you got to be crazy, I'm not going. I went to going to church, now we're going to Sunday school, now you go Wednesday, and then eventually I got her going on Sunday nights as well, and after we did it, she was the one that she sort of, I'm not going to say she surpassed me, but when it came out, going back to my previous statement about the girls, my two daughters, Wendy was the one that she was, no, they're going to be in church, She was, not that I didn't want them to be there, but she was really the leader. Once the girls came along, she took that position as being the mom of two girls and leading them and understanding how important it was.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's awesome. And, it takes both of you, like, pouring that in. But, I think you being gentle in leading her, like, not forcing it upon her, but being the man of the house that God called you to be, the spiritual leader, and guiding her through that, and just suggesting, hey, let's do this, and easing her into it. But God got a hold of her, and really did a work in her to where then she's stepping out and being bold, in her faith as well. How about you, Sherry? What, as y'all began a family too, and going in different churches, it's being a pastor is not an easy life. It's a rewarding life, but it's not always an easy life when you're called to different places. How did you see moving to different places? How did that affect your children?
They had to adjust. There was some adjustments. Some were easier than others. The second place we were was in the Atlanta area. It was Fayetteville, Georgia, and we actually, they call it church planting now. We called it pioneering back then. We pioneered the church. And so that's where we started our family, was right at the beginning of starting this church. So that's all they knew for a long time. We were in that area about 13 years. So that was, that would probably be considered home for them. They would probably consider that home. And they did well. The Lord, I felt like the Lord, when He opened doors for us, it wasn't like He discounted my girls. It's like there were the right schools lined up and the right people. And you're careful, going. I was very, and we were very both careful of who we trusted our kids with, to spend time with, to go to their house, things like that. So I felt like the Lord really directed us to people, because I've heard terrible stories, because we trust everybody in church.
Right.
But we knew to be careful, and we knew that, the Lord was going to cover them and protect them, and He guided us to the right church, to the right people, and they did well. Well. If you ask them, would I rather not been in a pastor's home? I'm not sure. I think there were times they would probably say, I would probably rather my dad do something else. But for the most part, they got to meet some of the most incredible people, and they got to sit at tables that otherwise they would not have, of really wonderful people, missionaries from all over, and it afforded them a neat opportunity as well. So.
Yeah, coming from a pastor's family, my grandfather was my pastor growing up, and just seeing the other side, and knowing that God really does direct your path and put you in the right places and put the right people around you, but also knowing you're getting the word in you all the time. And that plants that solid foundation. And even when I saw my cousins walking away from the faith, they couldn't get far. And when they were not doing what they needed to do, they would not come around because they knew they would be convicted. If they came around, they would hear the word. And, even just that, being molded and grounded, and realizing that when you're in that environment, Satan's also going to come around. What are some times that you feel like were marked moments, not just for you, but for your children as they were growing up, where they might have had to see you holding to faith?
Biggest one was after during Wendy's illness,
Mm-hmm.
So, they were, Janie, my youngest one, was still at home when Wendy was diagnosed with cancer. Paige, my oldest one, was probably just heading off or had just started school.
Mm-hmm.
But with her illness and cancer, and that was a 5 or 6 year journey.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the original diagnosis and just the faith and the belief, and then she was, I guess she got to live cancer free for about a year.
Mm-hmm.
After her original chemo, and then she got re-diagnosed. But that definitely has been the biggest marker for them.
Mm-hmm.
Was to just see their mom. I'll give her credit. I could say see their parents, but I give Wendy credit because she was the one that had to walk. She had the illness.
Mm-hmm.
She had the cancer.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a real test for her, much more so than me.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would say that was definitely one of the lasting things and the legacies that Wendy left with the girls was there's going to be troubles in life,
mm-hmm.
right? We're not promised heaven on earth. Heaven's after earth,
mm-hmm.
and there's going to be troubles.
Mm-hmm.
But Wendy's attitude was always faith,
mm-hmm.
and we still her famous words were always just power through it.
Mm-hmm.
And I always tell people, I'm like, that was her slogan, and that was people would say, how do you do it? How do you do it? She never missed hardly a day of work in 6 years of cancer and chemo and radiation and mastectomies, and she would just work from the bed. A few times, I'd prop her up, and people were like, how are you at work the day after you had chemo?
Mm-hmm.
And she was just like, you just suck it up and power through it.
Mm-hmm.
But I always tell people, you've got to have a power source,
right,
to be able to power through it.
Right.
And
it's not coming from yourself.
That's right.
Yeah.
And her faith in Jesus Christ mm-hmm. was her power source.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I'm not going to say it was easy for her, mm-hmm. but I'm saying she had a source of power that would enable her mm-hmm. to power through it. Mm-hmm. And so I think, as far as a marker for my children, watching their mom just battle and fight, and like I say, 6 years, I bet she missed 5-10 days of work, mm-hmm. And that's, probably over 100 chemo treatments and radiation mm-hmm. treatments and hospitalization. She just didn't do it,
Yeah.
And it just left such a legacy. And my girls, it's when you see somebody go through something like that, it's one of those kind of things. It's like, it's hard to complain about your hangnail or whatever it is you want to complain about.
Yeah, right.
When you see somebody going through something, really tough like that.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to say. Some people will lay out of work for a hangnail, right. And here she is. She's powering through mm-hmm. what she's been through because that's important to her. Mm-hmm. And just keeping that positive outlook and trusting God through everything. And, like you said, it's not easy, But one of the things that I have found in my own life is God gives us grace for whatever it is we're going through. And some days you need more grace than others. And so in those moments, like, he gives you so much more grace and so much more strength, and one of my other interviews, she said she held to Nehemiah 8:10, the joy of the Lord is my strength. And so just really hanging on to that joy, and that's what gives you the strength to power through.
There are times that grace, there's a certain portion that you need, and like manna, ask God, okay, I'm about to, and I had to sit in my car recently to deal with a situation with someone who's sick, and I'm trying to be patient with they have a lot of emotional needs. So I sat in the car and I'm like, Lord, you know how much grace I need for this encounter. Please give me that much grace at least. Sometimes it is. It's like the manna, the amount you need for the moment.
Yeah, I love that. And and that goes with anything you go through. One, talking about the power source, a sermon I heard a friend of mine preach years ago. She's a national evangelist, and she said, if you have, let's say you have a radio and you want to listen to it, you're not going to get anything out of that radio until you plug it into the power source. And so whatever it is you need, you're not going to get it until you plug it into that power source. And once you do, you've got the juice then that you can go and you can do, and whatever he's called you to do, you just plug into that power source and he gives you what you need to keep going.
Absolutely.
I love that was Wendy's phrase that she hung to. Yeah. Sherry, what about you? What has been that faith builder for your girls as they watch growing up?
I think they draw from what they have seen in their dad, and that's something that's so important to me, is that that pastors live at home what they preach in the pulpit. And Chuck G was that. He, the man in the pulpit was the man at home. And that was so important for my girls to see. And I remember going through, some churches, you go through seasons, and sometimes people are not kind. Christians are not kind sometimes because we're human. And so there's times they've seen people try, hurt their dad, or try, with words or actions, and as much as we try to protect them from that, they get wind of it. They're perceptive, and they love their daddy. They were both daddy's girls, love their daddy, and it hurt them to see him, go through hard times. But they watched him give grace when no one else wanted to, even when I didn't want to. They was able to give grace and forgiveness, and they got to see that and witness that. And I think that is something that just really strengthened their faith, and later helped them to be strong for what they would face down the road. So
that's so true. And I think all of us, we have to live out our faith, not just within the four walls of the church. We have to live it out where other people can see it. And, even when people come against you, you have to be that light to them, even when they're hurting you and sending daggers and arrows your way, because if you don't forgive, then it eats at you, and it becomes, it becomes a sickness for you. And, but if you can give people grace, if you can forgive them, then you don't know who's watching, that it's going to be that testament to them. Oh, wow, like they really are who they say they are, because I've watched them, and that old saying, you are the only Bible some people read. And I heard my mom say that one time, that even when she was walking through her grief journey, there were people watching her she did not know was watching, to see how she would live. And when somebody brought that to her attention, and she had no idea they were watching.
Right.
She was like, wow, like, that's something we always have to keep in the forefront of our minds, is people are watching your life. And I think all of us are that way, pastors especially. People watch pastors. How are they going to handle this? How are they going to handle people talking about them? How are they going to handle this situation? You know, what's going to happen now? And so, you know, God has to really, like, give you that grace to walk through that, because it is easy for anybody to operate in the flesh. And people don't understand that pastors can do that too. And it takes a lot of God's grace and a lot of being in the Word and being anchored in the Word in order to allow God's grace to work through you and protect you from that. So your girls have had a great example to follow in you and your husband, and you and Wendy. So talk about, you know, just where, like you, Chuck, just walking through it with Wendy. And, you know, I served on the board with you after she had gotten re-diagnosed, and just how y'all walked through that. Just how you saw God in those moments, in the hard days, and what did you learn in that process?
Well, a lot of this was going on during COVID, right? Mm-hmm. So we were dealing with COVID. That was, I tell people, when Wendy she had to have a double mastectomy, and we had to do it in Atlanta, and it was at the very beginning of COVID, when everybody had no idea what was going on, and her oncologist laughed and would always laugh at Wendy's experience and talk to her other patients about it, because she said when she's the only person she knew that ever did a drive-through mastectomy, because we dropped her off that morning. I couldn't go anywhere because everything was shut down for COVID. So I just went and I sat on the top floor of the garage because it was sunshine up there. And I just took a camp chair and sat up there for like 10 hours while they did the surgery, and then came back around, and they wheeled her back out that afternoon and put her back in the car. I'm like, all right, she's yours, take her home. I'm like, I'm not a doctor. They were like, yeah, but here, we've given you some links to some YouTube videos so you can watch. But I guess the thing is that our typical days, we both worked from home a lot during her illness. And so which was great, because we got to spend a lot of time, and I got to really be a very attentive caregiver for her, as far as taking her to appointments, because we did all our treatments out of Atlanta and Nashville. So it was always travel involved. But we started every day with prayer, and we, sit on that couch, have our coffee, do our devotions, have our prayer. And then we would start off every day with, today is the day that the Lord has made. So let us rejoice and be glad in it. It doesn't matter. It didn't say if you don't have cancer. No. He said, if you got cancer, today is a day the Lord has made. If you got to go to chemo today is a day that the Lord has made. If you got to go to radiation today, if you're not feeling good today, if you're after effects of radiation or chemo, today is a day that the Lord has made. So let us rejoice and be glad in it. And I think if you can just grasp that concept, right? It's that yes, I may be going through something that's life-threatening. It's a terminal illness, but it's a day the Lord has made, right? There's some reason for me to rejoice today. I just got to go find it, right?
Yeah.
I know Him as my Savior. There you go.
Yeah.
You want a reason to rejoice every day? There's your number one reason right there. It's there. It's just how you choose to reframe it and how you choose to look at it. And I think if I had any kind of influence and help it's easy, I think. Well, it's not going to say easy. But when you're the one carrying that illness, that terminal illness, it's easy for you to, the dark clouds to come over, and for you not to be able to see the sunshine through those dark clouds.
Yeah.
And I think that was, if I could do anything, that was my job, was to just, say, hey, we're going to be okay, you don't, when you got stage 4 terminal cancer, you don't need anybody to blow it up any bigger for you, right?
Right.
You need somebody to help you minimize it, right? Let's take some air out of the balloon. Let's not put more pressure and more air into the balloon. So that was my job, was that. And then, like I say, we just find something to celebrate every day and just realize that, the Lord is good in all things. And we have opportunities, whether it was just to be glad, whether it was we have treatment, we had great doctors, we had great nurses, we had so many people that blessed us during her illness. One of the greatest blessings that we had was not through a doctor, and it was not through a nurse, but it was the lady that scheduled all our appointments, because they were all in Atlanta, and we would have multiple appointments. And the oncologist and the radiologist, they didn't communicate. So they would have one on Monday, one on Tuesday, one on Wednesday, one on Thursday. And we had a great lady, Kelly, at Piedmont, who was our scheduler. And she would see it, and she would go, that's great. Wait, nobody knows that you guys are traveling back and forth. And she'd say, give me 15 minutes and give me 20 minutes or whatever. And she would go back and she would consolidate everything and get it all, like, okay, 8 o'clock here, you're 10 o'clock there, you're 12 o'clock there, and you can knock it all out in one day.
Wow.
And, and it was just, like I say, it was, we had great doctors and great nurses, but it's those kind of things where the Lord blesses you. With a lady that was, she just thought she was the schedule lady, right? But we thought she was on the same level with the doctors and the nurses when it came to our care, because she saved us so much time. She took so much stress and anxiety off of us. Right. So. Right.
She was an angel in operation.
She was.
Yeah.
Blessing.
Yeah, that's so good. And, I think what you shared was, just you being a light in the darkness, which is what we're called to be. But you being able to just shine some light in that darkness so that it didn't feel quite so heavy, and lifting that burden. Thank you for tuning in to part 1 of Chuck and Sherry's story as they share how God has worked in their life and really guided them along this journey of faith. I know that their words of wisdom has given you some insight no matter where you find yourself today. Join us next week as we continue our conversation with them and how they have seen God move in mighty ways and give them such peace and comfort during their times of grief. Thanks, and have a great day.